Chapter 1. The Decorated Soldier. The mountain air of Pine Ridge carried a sharp chill, even in early spring. Alexander McIntyre stood on the porch of his home just outside town, coffee steaming in his hand, as he watched the horizon turn gold. Pine Ridge was quiet, predictable, small-town streets, neat yards, neighbors who waved but never pried. For most men, it would have been enough. For Alexander, it was supposed to be a reward. 45 years old, broad-shouldered, and still carrying himself like he was in uniform, Alexander had lived more lives than most could imagine. 22 years in the United States Army, Special Forces, dozens of combat deployments, a chest full of ribbons and medals, each representing blood, sacrifice, and choices he never wanted to explain to civilians. The Silver Star, the Bronze Star, a Purple Heart tucked away in a drawer he rarely opened. Now, he was Colonel McIntyre no longer. He was simply Alexander, retired soldier turned small business owner. His security consulting firm, McIntyre Global Solutions, had become his new battlefield. Contracts with corporate clients, government facilities, and even a few private estates kept him busy enough. The work was steady, profitable, and respectable. But the house felt less like home with each passing month. "Dad," a voice called from inside. Alexander turned just as his daughter, Lila, stepped out onto the porch. 17, sharp-eyed, with his dark hair and her mother's smile, she was his anchor in this quiet civilian life. She carried her backpack slung over one shoulder, earbuds dangling around her neck. "Morning, kiddo," Alexander said, straightening up. "You're up early." "Math test today," she groaned, brushing a strand of hair out her face. "Figured I'd cram before the bus comes. You know, procrastination finally catching up to me." He smirked. "If you can do half the planning you do with Netflix binges, you'll ace it." Lila shot him a grin, then leaned against the railing beside him. "You're up early too." "Again. Habit," he said simply. What he didn't say was that he hadn't slept much. Years of conditioning had left him a light sleeper. Every creak, every sound outside, every shift in the air made his instincts flicker awake. Pine Ridge was quiet, yes, but silence never fooled a soldier. Lila studied him, tilting her head. "You're still adjusting, huh?" He gave her shoulder a gentle squeeze. "Something like that." The screen door creaked open again. Kristen stepped out, wrapped in a silk robe, her blonde hair pulled back in a messy bun. She carried a phone in her hand, typing quickly, barely glancing up at them. "You're both up early," she muttered, distracted. Alexander offered her a smile. "Coffee's hot." "Can't. I have that hospital volunteer shift at 9, then book club this afternoon," Kristen said, waving her phone vaguely as if the details lived inside it. "I'll grab something on the way." Lila frowned. "Book club again? You guys just had one last week." Kristen shot her daughter a sharp look. "Reading takes consistency, Lila. Not that you'd understand." "Mom, I read plenty," Lila shot back. "Just not whatever wine club you're calling book club." "Lila," Alexander said softly, a warning note in his tone. The girl sighed, grabbed her backpack, and muttered, "I'll wait for the bus." She kissed her father's cheek before heading down the steps, ignoring her mother entirely. Kristen watched her go, then exhaled sharply. "She's getting more defiant every day. Teenage years, I swear." Alexander studied his wife quietly. Once upon a time, Kristen had been warm, affectionate, and fiercely supportive of his military career. She used to wait for him at airports, clutching his arm like she'd never let go. Now, her kisses were perfunctory, her laughter rare, her phone always buzzing with plans she never explained in detail. "You're busy these days," Alexander said carefully. Kristen didn't even glance at him. "Community matters. You've got your business. I've got my commitments. That's how marriages work, Alex. Separate lives, mutual respect." "Separate lives?" he repeated under his breath. She finally looked at him, her blue eyes cool. "Don't start. Not today." Before he could respond, her phone buzzed again. Kristen glanced down, lips twitching in a faint smile, then walked back inside without another word. Alexander stood on the porch for a long moment, sipping his coffee, eyes fixed on the horizon. His chest felt heavy, though he wouldn't admit it out loud. The cracks were small, but they were there. Missed dinners, excuses, her distant eyes when they kissed goodnight. He finished his coffee and went inside. The office downstairs was lined with military memorabilia, though Alexander hadn't decorated it for show. Framed medals, photographs of his old unit, letters of commendation. On his desk sat files from his consulting firm, risk assessments, security plans, contract with corporations in Denver and beyond. Marcus Kane's voice came through the speakerphone as Alexander skimmed a document. "Alex, you still there?" "Yeah, I'm here," Alexander said, rubbing his temple. "Just making sure." Marcus chuckled. "You've been quiet. Usually means you're either planning something genius or lost in thought about that wife of yours." Alexander's jaw tightened. "We're fine. Fine." Marcus's laugh was low and knowing. "Brother, you've used that word in combat zones. Usually means anything but fine." Alexander let the silence answer for him. "Look, I'll be blunt," Marcus said. "You've seen the signs. You've smelled this smoke before, and you know damn well what it usually means. Don't ignore it." Alexander closed the file slowly. His friend's words weren't accusations, they were warnings. Marcus had been his right hand through firefights and night raids. He trusted Marcus more than anyone alive. But admitting what gnawed at him, that was harder than facing a gun barrel. "I'll handle it," Alexander said finally. "You'd better," Marcus muttered. "You're too sharp to play dumb." That evening, dinner was another quiet affair. Lila chatted about her math test. Kristen barely looked up from her phone, and Alexander forced conversation into the void. When Kristen excused herself for girls' night, Lila rolled her eyes openly. "Book club," she said, mocking the phrase with air quotes. Alexander gave her a look. "Enough, Dad," Lila whispered when Kristen left the room. "Don't you see what's happening? She's never here. She doesn't even try anymore." Alexander's chest tightened. "She's busy." Lila's eyes softened. "You don't have to pretend for me." He reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "I'll always protect this family. You know that, right?" "I know," she said firmly. "I just don't want you getting hurt." Later that night, Alexander lay awake in the master bedroom, staring at the ceiling. Kristen's side of the bed was cold, untouched. The house was silent. Too silent. Every instinct he had, trained over decades, sharpened by survival, whispered to him in that darkness. He'd felt it in war zones, in ambushes, in villages where something just didn't sit right. Danger. It wasn't on the battlefield this time. It was in his own home. Chapter 2, Red Flags. The days that followed were deceptively ordinary, but Alexander McIntyre's instincts told him otherwise. He had survived ambushes in deserts and jungles not by ignoring details, but by noticing the smallest inconsistencies, the misplaced footprint, the silence before an explosion, the flicker of hesitation in an enemy's eyes. Now those same instincts were gnawing at him in his own home. Kristen's schedule was the first sign. One Thursday morning, she stood by the mirror in their bedroom, carefully fixing her hair. A navy blue dress clung to her in a way Alexander couldn't remember her wearing for the hospital volunteer shifts she claimed to be attending. "You're dressed up," he said casually, buttoning his shirt. Kristen smiled thinly at her reflection. "It's a donor event after my shift. The hospital asked me to stay." Alexander leaned against the doorway, studying her. They usually hold those events in the evenings. She froze for just a fraction of a second, an imperceptible pause to anyone else, but Alexander caught it. Then she smoothed her hair and said, "Well, this one's different." He nodded, hiding his thoughts. "Have a good day." She kissed his cheek quickly, grabbed her purse, and left in a hurry. The faint trace of perfume lingered in the air, sharper and more expensive than the floral scent she usually wore. Alexander sat on the edge of the bed after she left, staring at the closed door. He could almost hear Marcus's voice in his head. "Don't ignore the signs." That evening, the house was quiet when he came back from the office. Lila sat at the kitchen table, headphones around her neck, a history book spread open but forgotten as she scrolled on her phone. "Hey, Dad," she said, perking up when he walked in. "Hungry. Starving," Alexander admitted, loosening his collar. "Where's your mom?" Lila shrugged. "She texted she'd be late. Girls' night, I think." Again. He opened the fridge, pulling out leftovers. Again. Yeah, they must really love wine, Lila said with a smirk. Alexander shot her a look. Don't be smart. I'm just saying, Lila trailed off, her eyes flicking toward him with something unspoken. It's weird, right? He set the plate on the counter and met her gaze. What's weird? She's never here anymore. It's like she's always got some reason. Book clubs, hospital shifts, whatever. You don't think she's? Lila hesitated, biting her lip. Alexander's chest tightened. His daughter's words sliced close to the suspicion he had buried deep. Lila, he said firmly, your mother is busy, that's all. Don't jump to conclusions. Lila gave a small nod, but her expression said she didn't believe it. She slid her phone back in her pocket and reached for her book. Okay, if you say so. Alexander sat across from her, watching her pretend to study. The tension in the room pressed heavy against his chest. His daughter could sense the truth, even if she didn't know it. 2 nights later, Marcus Kane dropped by. The former Green Beret was taller, rougher around the edges, his jaw shadowed with stubble and his voice carrying the gravel of too many cigars and combat tours. He leaned against Alexander's porch railing with a beer in hand, scanning the quiet neighborhood like it was a war zone. Nice place, Marcus said. Too quiet, though. Makes me itch. Alexander chuckled softly. You'll get used to it. Don't want to get used to it, Marcus replied. He took a long pull from his beer, then glanced sideways at Alexander. So, you going to tell me what's going on, or do I have to spell it out? Alexander frowned. What do you mean? Marcus laughed darkly. Come on, brother. I can smell it. You got that same look you had in Afghanistan when you knew someone was lying through their teeth. And it ain't me lying this time. Alexander said nothing, just stared out into the darkening street. Marcus's voice hardened. It's Kristen, isn't it? She's acting different. Alexander finally turned to him, his jaw tightening. Drop it. No. Marcus shot back. I've watched too many brothers ignore the signs until it's too late. You already know, Alex. You just don't want to admit it. The words hung heavy in the air. Alexander exhaled slowly, gripping the railing. She says she's busy. Hospital work. Book clubs. Girls' nights. I don't want to believe otherwise. Marcus leaned closer, lowering his voice. Belief doesn't change facts. You taught me that. You told me once, truth is truth, no matter what we want. Don't forget your own damn words. Alexander's eyes flickered with conflict, but he said nothing. Over the next week, Alexander began to observe more carefully. He didn't snoop, at least not yet, but he memorized the details. On Monday, Kristen said she was volunteering at the hospital. Yet when she came home, she carried no badge, no volunteer paperwork, just a faint trace of cologne on her clothes that wasn't hers. On Wednesday, she claimed book club at her friend Jessica's house. But Alexander had seen Jessica at the grocery store at the exact same time. On Friday, she left for girls' night, with her phone clutched too tightly. Smiling at messages she quickly closed when he walked into the room. Every inconsistency lodged itself into Alexander's mind like data points on a mission map. Times, locations, scents, expressions, all cataloged. He didn't confront her, not yet. Confrontation without proof was suicide, and he had never gone into battle unprepared. At the dinner table, Lila noticed too. She tried to lighten the tension with jokes, with stories from school, with exaggerated impressions of her teachers. Alexander laughed when he could, but the weight in his chest grew heavier each day. Late at night, lying awake in the darkness of their bedroom, he stared at the ceiling, listening to Kristen's soft breaths as she slept beside him. His soldier's instincts whispered again. Something was wrong, deeply, undeniably wrong. But for now, Alexander McIntyre remained silent, quietly tracking the red flags, storing them like ammunition for a battle he didn't want but knew was coming. Chapter 3, The Betrayal. The gut never lied. Alexander McIntyre had learned that the hard way in war zones where hesitation meant death. And lately, his gut twisted every time Kristen left the house with another excuse tucked neatly into her lips. It was Tuesday evening when he finally decided to stop ignoring it. She had announced another book club, with her usual casual tone, dressed a little sharper than necessary, her perfume heavier than before. Don't wait up, she said, slipping her heels on by the door. Alexander folded his arms. These book clubs must be intense. You've been through more novels this month than most professors. Kristen gave a faint, mocking smile. Sorry, I'm not content just sitting around all day, Alex. Before he could reply, she was gone. The silence that followed felt heavier than the walls. Lila was upstairs, headphones on, leaving Alexander alone with his thoughts. He grabbed his jacket, slipped his keys into his pocket, and made a decision. He kept his black SUV 2 cars behind Kristen's sedan as she drove across town. He wasn't reckless, wasn't obvious. Years of surveillance and counterintelligence work came back naturally, shadowing, timing stoplights, memorizing her turns. Kristen didn't head toward Jessica's house, where a so-called book club supposedly met. Instead, she turned into the parking lot of a downtown bar, one Alexander knew too well from local chatter. It was a cop hangout. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. From the dark corner of the lot, he watched as Kristen parked. Seconds later, another car pulled in beside her, a black Dodge Charger polished to a shine with tinted windows. The man who stepped out made Alexander's blood run cold. Detective Ryan Cole. Ryan Cole was younger, mid-30s maybe, broad-shouldered, clean-shaven, carrying himself with the swagger of a man who thought his badge made him untouchable. The holstered pistol on his hip wasn't concealed. It was displayed like a trophy. Alexander stayed, low in his seat, as Kristen stepped out of her car. She smiled in a way Alexander hadn't seen in years, soft, girlish, almost shy. Then she walked straight into Ryan's arms. Cole wrapped one arm around her waist, kissing her deeply in the glow of the street lamp. Kristen melted into him, laughing softly as if the world around them didn't exist. Alexander's jaw locked. It was one thing to suspect, another to see it in flesh and blood. His wife, his partner of 20 years, in the arms of a swaggering cop who strutted like he owned the ground he walked on. Ryan murmured something, tapping the badge clipped to his belt. Kristen giggled, brushing her hand across it like it was some glittering prize. They strolled toward the bar together, hand in hand, her head tilted toward him with admiration. Alexander forced himself to breathe, to stay still. His training screamed against the fury rising in his chest. He could have walked across the lot, confronted them both, ended this charade in seconds. But another voice inside him, calmer, sharper, held him back. Not yet. The next morning, Kristen moved through the kitchen like nothing was wrong. She hummed as she poured herself coffee, her phone lighting up every few seconds with messages she tilted away from Alexander's sight. "You're cheerful," Alexander said, breaking the silence. Kristen flashed him a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Can I be in a good mood?" "You can," he said evenly. "I just don't remember book club ever putting you in this good of a mood." Her smile faltered for a heartbeat, then sharpened. "Maybe if you tried new things, you'd understand. Sitting behind a desk at your little security firm isn't exactly exciting." Lila, sitting at the table with her cereal, glanced up in surprise. "Mom, what?" Kristen snapped. "It's true. He used to lead men, travel the world. Now, he pushes papers and clings to his medals like some washed-up war hero." Alexander's jaw flexed, but he stayed silent. Lila's voice cracked. "That's not fair." Kristen ignored her, grabbing her purse and striding out the door without another word. The kitchen fell into silence. Lila looked at her father, worry etched across her face. "Dad, what's happening to her?" Alexander placed a steady hand over hers. "Eat your breakfast, Lila." That evening, Alexander met Marcus at a quiet bar on the edge of town. The two men sat in a booth, a pitcher of beer between them, the low hum of country music filling the silence. Marcus leaned forward, reading Alexander's expression. "So, you followed her." Alexander nodded once. "And Detective Ryan Cole," Alexander said flatly. Marcus whistled low. That explains the perfume, the smiles, the late nights. A badge and a gun. Some women can't resist the shine." Alexander's knuckles whitened against his glass. "I saw them together. Hands. Kissing. Like teenagers." Marcus cursed under his breath, then shook his head. "I'm sorry, brother. I really am. But at least now you know. Alexander stared into his drink. Part of me wanted to drag him out of that bar, put him through a wall. And what would that get you? Marcus said sharply. A charge. A mugshot. Exactly what that bastard would want. He's got the badge, Alex. You don't. You go at him head on, you lose. Alexander's silence spoke louder than words. Marcus leaned in closer, lowering his voice. You've been patient your whole life when it mattered. This is no different. Let them dig their own graves. You collect evidence. You watch. You wait. And when the time comes, you in it clean. Alexander finally lifted his gaze, meeting Marcus's steady eyes. There was no judgment there, only the unshakable loyalty of a brother in arms. Patience, Alexander muttered. The word felt like broken glass in his throat. Patience, Marcus repeated. It's what keeps us alive. Over the next days, Kristen's disdain became sharper. She mocked his quiet civilian life, rolled her eyes at his discipline, belittled his routines. You used to be someone, she hissed one night when Lila had gone upstairs. Now you're just boring, predictable, sitting behind a desk, clinging to a past no one cares about. Alexander didn't respond. He just watched her walk away, her phone lighting up with a message she didn't bother to hide. Her contempt cut deeper than any knife, but he swallowed it. He had faced worse. He wasn't going to fight this war on impulse. Not yet. Alexander McIntyre, soldier, strategist, survivor, began to gather quietly. He memorized her words, tracked her lies, and filed away every red flag into the steel vault of his mind. The betrayal was real. The wound was deep. But patience, he told himself, patience. And so he waited. Chapter 4, The Raid. The night was still when it began. Alexander McIntyre sat at the oak dining table, papers spread in front of him, though his eyes weren't on them. He had been reviewing security contract for a Denver client, but his mind drifted to Kristen again, her laughter into the phone earlier, the quick retreat upstairs, the faint click of the bedroom door locking behind her. Lila was asleep. The house should have been calm. Instead, Alexander felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. That old instinct again, sharp and unrelenting. Something was about to happen. And then, a thunderous crash ripped through the front door. With splintered hinges shrieked, and armed men in black tactical gear stormed into the living room, flashlights slicing across the walls. The air filled with the heavy stomp of boots, the metallic click of rifles, and shouted commands. Police! SWAT! Everybody down! Alexander stood slowly, pushing his chair back. His jaw tightened as he took in the scene. At least 8 men, body armor, helmets, AR-15s, and the cocky swagger of men who thought they had power on their side. At their center strode Detective Ryan Cole. His badge gleamed on his chest, his pistol rested low on his thigh holster, and his grin was wide, cruel, and confident. Evening, Colonel, Ryan sneered, his voice dripping arrogance. Or should I say, ex-colonel. You don't get to hide behind that title anymore. Alexander's eyes narrowed. What is this? This, Ryan declared loudly enough for everyone to hear, is me taking everything that ever mattered to you. Your medals, your honor, your wife, even your precious little daughter. Alexander didn't move. His pulse slowed, the way it always did in combat. Every detail sharpened, their spacing, their weapons, their arrogance. And then Kristen appeared. She walked in from the hallway, her heels clicking against the hardwood, her arms folded. She wasn't frightened. She wasn't confused. She was with them. And worse, she smiled. Walking to Ryan's side, she rested a hand lightly on his arm. Then she turned toward Alexander. Her lips curled into something cruel before she spat directly onto his old dress uniform, hanging on the chair beside him. He's a washed-up coward, she said with venom. Ryan's more of a man than you ever were. The words struck deeper than any bullet. At the top of the stairs, Lila's voice broke through the chaos. Dad! Alexander's head snapped upward. His daughter stood frozen in her pajamas, her wide eyes darting from the armed men to her mother clinging to Ryan's arm. Horror twisted across her face. Lila, go back to your room, Alexander said firmly, his tone calm, controlled. Ryan laughed. Oh no, let her watch. Let her see what a real man looks like. She deserves to know who's in charge now. Two SWAT officers stepped forward, one yanking a pair of cuffs from his belt. Hand behind your back, old man, the first sneered. Don't make us rough you up. The other added, grinning. Didn't expect to end your career like this, huh? Soldier boy. Their mockery rang in the air, but Alexander's expression didn't flicker. He slowly raised his hands, his breathing steady. His movements carried none of the panic they expected, just the precise discipline of a soldier who had stared down worse men in darker places. Inside, fury simmered, but he caged it, locking it down, just as he had done countless times before when chaos erupted around him. Careful, Alexander said quietly, his voice calm as stone. You don't know what you're doing. The first SWAT officer laughed, shoving him roughly toward the table. Yeah? You think you scare us? You're nothing now. Just a relic-playing businessman in a small town. Ryan smirked wider, pulling Kristen closer to his side. See, Alex, this is the difference between us. You lived your life in shadows and medals, but all that's gone. Me? I've got the badge, the authority, the power. And soon, I'll have your family too. Lila's voice cracked from the stairs. Mom, how could you? Kristen didn't look at her daughter. She only clung tighter to Ryan. You'll understand when you grow up, Lila. Your father was always weak. Alexander's jaw clenched. His fists curled subtly, though his arms remained raised. He wanted nothing more than to dismantle the smug detective and every man behind him. He could see their sloppy spacing, their overconfidence, their lack of awareness. In the field, they would have lasted seconds against his team. But this wasn't the battlefield. This was his home, and his daughter was watching. So Alexander McIntyre stood calm, silent, his soldiers' discipline wrapping around him like armor. Chapter 5, The One Call. The living room still hummed with the sound of weapons being held too tightly and men trying to laugh louder than their nerves. Kristen stood close to Ryan, her lips curved in a smirk that hadn't faltered once since the raid began. Lila's breathing trembled from the staircase, frozen halfway down, her eyes locked on her father. Alexander McIntyre hadn't flinched, even with a dozen rifles pointed at him, with his wife spitting venom and his daughter caught in the chaos. He stood like stone, silent, steady, unyielding. His chest rose and fell with a soldier's controlled breathing, his gaze cold enough to cut glass. Finally, he broke the silence. I want a phone call. The SWAT men snorted. One of them barked out a laugh. Ryan Cole tilted his head, grin spreading. A phone call. Ryan mocked, his tone dripping with contempt. What are you in some movie? This isn't jail, Alex. You don't get rights here. You get whatever I decide. But Alexander's voice carried no desperation, no plea. Just calm steel. One phone call. The way he said it made even the SWAT men hesitate. For a heartbeat, uncertainty flickered in the room. Ryan caught it, his pride bristling. He couldn't afford to look weak in front of Kristen or his men. Fine, Ryan said with mock generosity. One call. Make it quick. Call your lawyer, call your priest, hell, call the pizza place. Won't matter. He jerked his chin at one of his men. Give him your phone. I want to hear who the old war hero's crying to. The officer handed over a phone, snickering. Alexander accepted it slowly, his eyes never leaving Ryan's. Then, with practiced precision, he dialed a number from memory, digits etched into his mind from another lifetime, another world. The line clicked. A voice answered, deep and steady, calm as the sound of distant thunder. McIntyre. Sir, Alexander said evenly, as if nothing unusual was happening around him. I'm cashing in a favor. On the other end, silence. Then the man's voice came back, clipped, controlled, but with an edge sharp enough to draw blood. Location. Alexander gave the address, his voice flat. Understood, the man replied. Stay calm. Do not resist. We're already moving. The line went dead. Ryan smirked. That's it? That's your big lifeline? Who was that, Alex? Old war buddy? Some retirement home pal? You really think anyone's coming for you tonight? Alexander handed the phone back without a word. His calm unsettled the room more than shouting ever could. Minutes ticked by. Ryan strutted across the living room, puffing his chest, running his mouth louder for Kristen's benefit. See, sweetheart, this is what I told you. He's nothing now. Look at him, standing there, helpless, waiting on ghosts from the past. Meanwhile, I've got real power. My badge opens doors. My team answers when I call. That's the difference between a washed-up soldier and a man with authority. Kristen's laugh was brittle, but she clung tighter to Ryan's arm, feeding his arrogance. Lila finally whispered, her voice small but sharp. Dad's not helpless. Ryan wheeled toward her with a smirk. Oh, kid, trust me, he's finished. Better get used to seeing me around the house. I'll be the one looking after you now. Alexander's eyes flickered, the first spark of real fury, but his voice stayed steady. You should have walked away, Cole. Ryan chuckled. Yeah? And what would have stopped me? The answer came not from Alexander, but from outside. Headlights cut through the curtains. Then another set. Then another. The low, heavy purr of engines filled the street. Doors slammed. Radios crackled. The sound of disciplined boots hitting pavement echoed like rolling thunder. Ryan frowned. His men shifted, glancing toward the windows. What the hell? Lila moved to the banister, peering through the slats of the blinds. Her eyes widened. Dad, there are black SUVs everywhere. Ryan barked at his men. Check it out. Now. But it was too late. The front yard lit up in blinding white beams as floodlights snapped on. Dozens of red dots danced across the room, laser sights cutting through every opening, painting across Ryan's chest, across the helmets of his SWAT team. A deep, amplified voice boomed from outside, calm, but carrying absolute authority. Detective Ryan Cole, you and your men are surrounded. Lay down your weapons. Now. Panic rippled through the SWAT unit. They hadn't even heard the approach. No sirens, no warning, just silence, and then overwhelming force. Ryan's face drained of color. What the hell is this? The front door burst open again, not with a crash, but with surgical precision. Men in matte black gear poured in, not sloppy like Ryan's crew, but silent, methodical. Their weapons were cleaner, heavier, locked onto targets with lethal patience. These weren't cops. They were federal, elite, the kind of men Alexander used to run with. Drop them, the leader barked, his tone brooking no debate. Ryan's men faltered, exchanging frantic looks. One by one, rifles clattered to the floor. The humiliation was written on their faces. They'd walked in like kings, and now stood trembling, hands raised, outclassed, and outgunned. Kristen's smirk finally cracked. Ryan, what's happening? Who are they? Ryan stammered, rage and fear twisting his features. This is some kind of mistake. I'm the law here. The federal commander stepped forward, visor reflecting Ryan's panicked eyes. His voice was razor sharp. Not tonight, you're not. In seconds, Ryan's entire SWAT unit was disarmed, their gear stripped away, their confidence shattered. They stood lined against the wall like rookies who'd been caught playing soldier in a war they didn't understand. The room fell silent, the only sound the click of zip ties locking around wrists. Ryan glared at Alexander, his chest heaving, his voice dropping to a hiss. What did you do? Alexander met his eyes, calm as ever. One call. Chapter 6, The Turnaround. The floodlights outside bathed the McIntyre home in an unforgiving glare. Black SUVs and unmarked sedans lined the street like a silent army. Neighbors had spilled out onto porches, phones raised, whispering in disbelief. Pine Ridge was a quiet town. Scenes like this belonged on television, not in their cul-de-sacs. Inside the living room, Ryan Cole's swagger had evaporated. His SWAT team, once so cocky, stood against the wall with their hands zip-tied, stripped of weapons and dignity. The federal commander, a man in plain black tactical gear with a scar running across his jaw, held a folder in one hand. He flipped it open with deliberate calm. Detective Ryan Cole, the commander's voice carried like steel striking stone. You're under investigation for racketeering, drug trafficking, falsified police reports, and gross abuse of authority. We have sworn affidavits, financial records, and testimony from your own men. Effective immediately, you're relieved of duty. Gasps spread through the room. One of the SWAT men muttered a curse under his breath. Lila, frozen at the staircase, clutched the railing as though trying to steady the world that was tilting beneath her feet. Ryan's face twisted. "This is crap. You don't have anything on me." The commander's eyes narrowed. "We have everything." He dropped a stack of photographs onto the coffee table. Grainy surveillance shots, Ryan shaking hands with known gang affiliates, envelopes exchanged in back alleys, the unmistakable profile of his face leaving a strip club he'd sworn to have raided. Kristen's lips parted. But Ryan snapped at her, desperate. "They're doctored. They're fake. Don't listen to them." The commander silenced him with a raised hand. Then, with almost theatrical timing, he pulled out a flash drive and handed it to one of his men. Within moments, a small projector cast images against the wall of the living room. The first video rolled. Ryan in uniform, leaning on the hood of his cruiser, handing off a bag of white powder to a dealer. His voice was unmistakable. The neighbors outside gasped as the footage streamed onto a flat screen one agent had carried to the yard for public viewing. A murmur of voices swelled. "That's Cole, that's our detective. My God, he's dirty." Kristen staggered back, her hand flying her mouth. Alexander stood in the center of it all, silent, arms crossed. He hadn't said a word since his phone call. His face carried no triumph, no smugness, just calm inevitability. Ryan lunged forward, veins bulging in his neck. "Shut that off. You hear me? Shut it off." Two federal agents shoved it back into place. The commander wasn't finished. He flipped another page in the folder. "And as for personal misconduct, your affair with Mrs. Kristen McIntyre." A hush fell like a hammer. Kristen froze. The commander gestured, and suddenly the projector switched to a new set of images. Surveillance photos. Kristen and Ryan holding hands outside a hotel. Kristen kissing him against his cruiser in a dim parking lot. Ryan's arm wrapped possessively around her waist at a girls' night bar, while Kristen laughed, glass in hand. The neighborhood collectively sucked in air. Phones were raised higher, recording every second. Kristen's face drained of color. No, this can't, but it was too late. The evidence was undeniable, the images crystal clear. Her carefully hidden escapades were now billboard in front of the whole community, her daughter and her husband. Lila's voice cracked, cutting through the murmurs. "Mom." Kristen turned toward her daughter, trembling. "Lila, listen to me." But Lila recoiled, tears brimming. You lied to me. All those nights, you said it was charity work. You said it was for the hospital." Kristen reached for her, desperate. "I did it for us, no." Lila's voice rang sharp, slicing through the room. "You did it for yourself." She backed up the stairs, disgust plain on her face. The betrayal was raw, laid bare for every watching eye. Alexander finally moved, his voice cutting through the chaos. Calm, even unshaken. "You spit on my uniform tonight, Kristen. Call me a coward. But this..." He gestured at the damning wall of evidence. "This is what cowardice looks like. Hiding in lies. Selling your soul for cheap thrills." Kristen shook her head violently, panic in her eyes. "Alex, no, you don't understand. I was unhappy. I was lonely. You were always so disciplined." His voice cracked like a whip. "Loyal? Present for my family? You threw that away." The neighbors were whispering louder now, scandal rippling like wildfire. Kristen's reputation, her carefully polished social circles, her pride, they were crumbling in real time. Ryan, red-faced and sputtering, thrashed against the agents restraining him. "This isn't over. McIntyre, you hear me? I'll burn this whole damn town before I go down." The commander stepped forward, voice iron. "You'll burn nothing, Cole. You're finished." With a nod, the agents hauled Ryan toward the door. He struggled, shouting curses, but the more he fought, the more pathetic he looked, dragged like a rabid animal in front of flashing phones and neighbors' disgust. Kristen lunged after him. "Ryan, don't leave me." But Ryan snapped, venom dripping from his voice. "Shut up. You're nothing without me." The word struck her harder than any slap could. She staggered, eyes wide, lips trembling. The door slammed behind them. Ryan's voice muffled as he was shoved into the back of a federal SUV. Sirens flared briefly, not the local wail of Pine Ridge patrol cars, but the low, commanding hum of federal authority. And then silence. Kristen stood alone in the wreckage of her choices. Mascara streaked down her face, trembling in front of neighbors, agents, and most of all, her husband and daughter. Alexander didn't gloat. He didn't move toward her. He simply stood with that same soldier's calm, letting the weight of truth dismantle what she thought was power. Kristen's breath hitched, her voice a broken whisper. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen, but her plan had backfired spectacularly. Chapter 7: The Fallout. The house was eerily quiet after the flashing lights and federal SUVs disappeared down the street. Only the faint hum of neighbors' voices lingered outside, but even that was slowly fading. Pine Ridge had witnessed enough drama to last them years, and yet the scandal would be whispered in grocery stores and church pews for months to come. Alexander stood in the center of the living room, still as stone. His posture was military, arms crossed, jaw set. His eyes, though calm, carried the weight of everything that had unfolded. Kristen broke the silence. Her voice trembled, cracking under desperation. "Alex, please. I don't even know what to say." Alexander didn't move. She took a shaky step toward him, mascara streaking her face, hands trembling. "It was a mistake. All of it. Ryan lied to me. He made me believe things. He told me I was special. I was lost, Alex. I was misled." Alexander's eyes flicked to her, sharp and unyielding. His voice, when it came, was cold steel. "You weren't misled. You chose him. Every night you lied to me, to our daughter, to yourself. That wasn't confusion. That was betrayal." Kristen's chest heaved. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I swear, if I could take it back, stop." Alexander's voice cracked like a command barked on a battlefield. "Don't stand there and pretend this was some accident. You spit on my uniform. You let that man storm into my house, threaten my family, and you stood behind him." Kristen flinched. "I was angry. I thought you didn't care anymore, always so detached, so wrapped up in discipline and honor. You made me feel alive again." The words landed like poison in the air. From a staircase, Lila's voice cut in, trembling but strong. "Alive." She descended slowly, her eyes red from crying. "You call that alive, Mom? Sneaking around with a cop who turned out to be a criminal? Lying to me every time I asked where you were?" Kristen turned toward her daughter, frantic. "Lila, please, you don't understand. I didn't want to hurt you. I thought no." Lila snapped, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You didn't think at all. You cared about yourself, not me. Not Dad, just you." Kristen reached out, but Lila stepped back, shaking her head. Her voice cracked with disgust. "I don't even want to look at you." The silence that followed was suffocating. Kristen's face crumbled as her daughter turned away, moving to stand beside Alexander. Lila's small frame leaned against her father's steady one, as if claiming her side without hesitation. Alexander placed a hand on Lila's shoulder, never taking his eyes off Kristen. "You wanted freedom," he said flatly. "You want to chase your thrill. Well, now you've got it. You chose him. So live with what comes next." Kristen shook her head violently, tears streaming. "No, Alex, please. Don't do this. I can't lose you. I can't lose Lila. This house, our life." Alexander's voice stayed cold. "You lost us the moment you opened that door to him." The weight of his words hit like a blade. Kristen dropped to her knees, sobbing, clutching at the rug as though begging the ground itself for mercy. "Please, I'll change. I'll do anything. Just give me one more chance." Lila's voice, sharp and resolute, sliced through her mother's begging. "You had 1,000 chances, and you threw them away." Kristen's sobs grew louder, pitiful and raw, but neither Alexander nor Lila moved toward her. Outside, faint murmurs could still be heard, neighbors lingering, whispering, recording. Pine Ridge was a small town. By morning, Kristen McIntyre's disgrace would be on everyone's lips. The image of her clinging to a corrupt cop while spitting on her decorated husband would spread like wildfire. The charity groups, the book clubs, the hospital board, her entire social world would collapse overnight. Inside, the collapse was already complete. Lila turned to her father, her voice quieter now. "What happens next?" Alexander's eyes softened just a fraction when he looked at her. We rebuild. Together. Kristen let out a broken sob. You can't just erase me, Alex. I'm your wife. Lila's mother. Alexander's voice cut her off. Titles don't mean loyalty. Blood doesn't erase betrayal. He moved past her, his hand steady on Lila's back as he guided her toward the stairs. You want it out. Consider this the end of your story here. Kristen reached after them, her hands clawing at the air. Alex, Lila, please, I'll be nothing without you. Alexander didn't turn. His voice carried back, firm and final. You made that choice. Now live with it. The two of them disappeared upstairs, leaving Kristen kneeling in the wreckage of her lies. The night stretched on. By dawn, Ryan Cole was plastered across news feeds, arrested, disgraced, his career obliterated in a storm of federal charges. His swaggering grin replaced by a mugshot that would haunt him for the rest of his life. And Kristen? Her phone buzzed endlessly through the morning, but not with support. Messages poured in from her charity circle, her friends, her neighbors, condemnations, severed ties, icy words of betrayal. We can't be associated with you. How could you do this to Alex, to Lila? Don't contact me again. She watched her reputation implode in real time. Each notification another nail in the coffin of the life she had tried to build. By the end of the week, the McIntyre name was still respected in Pine Ridge, but only because of Alexander and Lila. Kristen's name, however, was mud. She was uninvited, unwelcome, a social outcast. And every time she passed a mirror, she saw the face of a woman who had gambled everything and lost. Chapter 8, Rebuilding. The weeks that followed were not easy, but for Alexander McIntyre, hardship was nothing new. He had fought through jungles, deserts, and urban battlefields. He knew survival wasn't about avoiding pain, but pushing through it. Now the battlefield was his home, and the enemy was the quiet aftermath of betrayal. Every morning he rose before dawn, the same as he had in his military years. The house felt different now, quieter, steadier. Kristen's absence, once a raw wound, had become a strange relief. He brewed strong coffee, fried eggs and bacon, and left a plate ready for Lila before school. Lila shuffled into the kitchen one morning, hair messy, still half asleep. She froze at the sight of the plate. You didn't have to do that, Dad. Alexander set his coffee down and gave her a faint smile. I did, and I'll keep doing it. You've had enough chaos. You deserve stability. Her eyes softened, but she still teased. So, you're trying to make up for Mom's complete failure at pancakes? He chuckled, deep, genuine, the kind of laugh Lila hadn't heard from him in a long time. Exactly, except mine are edible. The two shared breakfast, and though the silence between bites was heavy at first, day by day it grew lighter. Lila began to talk more about school, friends, her art projects. She laughed again, and each laugh was another piece of Alexander's fractured world put back into place. During the days, Alexander threw himself into his private security consulting firm. The phone never stopped ringing now. Word had spread quickly after the incident with Ryan Cole. Though the details were hushed in official reports, people knew Alexander had been at the center, and that reputation drew clients. He sat across from executives, government contractors, and even small-town businesses, mapping out protection plans, training regimens, and emergency protocols. His voice carried authority, his movements sharp and precise. It wasn't just work, it was a reclamation of identity. One afternoon, Marcus Kane barged into his office, grinning, dropping his sandwich bag on the desk. Turkey and Swiss. And before you say you're too busy, eat. Soldiers don't run on empty. Alexander raised an eyebrow. Since when are you my supply sergeant? Since you started skipping meals and pretending you're 25 again. Marcus shot back, plopping into the chair opposite him. Alexander smirked, unwrapping the sandwich. Fair enough. The two ate in silence for a moment, the comfortable silence of men who had seen too much together to need constant words. Then Marcus leaned back, folding his arms. You're doing good, brother. Real good. Lila's smiling again. You're back in the game. I see it. Alexander glanced down, chewing thoughtfully. Doesn't feel like I'm all the way back, but I'm getting there. Marcus nodded firmly. One brick at a time. That's how you build anything worth standing on. Alexander met his friend's eyes, and for the first time in months, there was no shadow of doubt behind his gaze. Thanks, Marcus, for sticking around. Marcus shrugged. Where else would I be? You're my brother, blood or not. Evenings were reserved for Lila. They cooked dinner together, watched old war movies, or sometimes just sat on the porch, listening to the crickets. Alexander made it a point to be present, not just in body, but in spirit. One night, as they washed dishes, Lila hesitated before speaking. Dad, yeah, he asked, handing her a rinse plate. Do you ever regret it? Not walking away when Mom did all that? Alexander's hands stilled for a moment. He looked at his daughter, her eyes searching, vulnerable. He wiped his hands with a towel before answering. No, because walking away would have meant giving up on myself. And on you. And that wasn't an option. Lila's throat tightened. She set the plate down and hugged him fiercely, her arms tight around his waist. I'm proud of you. I want you to know that. Alexander swallowed hard, his large hand gently resting on her back. And I'm proud of you, kiddo. You didn't deserve any of this, but you've handled it with more strength than most grown men I've served with. Lila sniffled against him, and for the first time since the chaos, both father and daughter let their tears fall openly, not of despair, but of release. Alexander's expertise soon drew attention from beyond Pine Ridge. A call came one afternoon from an old contact at the Department of Homeland Security. Colonel McIntyre, the man's voice carried respect. We've got a joint task force looking for consultants on critical infrastructure security. We need someone with your experience. Alexander leaned back in his chair, phone pressed to his ear. I'm retired. I've got a daughter to raise, a business to run. The man chuckled. I'm not asking you to ship off to war zones again. Just advise. Help us tighten things stateside. Your country could still use you. Alexander glanced out the window where Lila sat on the porch swing, sketchbook in her lap, sunlight catching her hair. He smiled faintly. All right, I'll consult. On my terms. And just like that, he was back, quietly, steadily, in the fold of service. Not in combat gear, not leading raids, but as a strategist, a protector, a man who had never stopped being a soldier at heart. Marcus teased him about it later over a beer. So much for retirement, huh? Alexander smirked, taking a sip. This time, I'm doing it my way. No politics, no command breathing down my neck. Just the work. And Lila's my first priority. Marcus raised his bottle. To second chances. Alexander clinked his against it. To rebuilding. The weeks turned into months, and the McIntyre household slowly transformed. The air no longer carried the stench of betrayal. Instead, it smelled of fresh paint from Lila's new art room, of home-cooked meals, of life being lived honestly. Lila flourished under her father's care. Her grades climbed, her laughter returned, and her sketches grew more confident. She even entered a local art competition, her proudest piece titled Unbroken. When she won first place, Alexander stood in the crowd, clapping louder than anyone else, his chest swelling with pride. Later that night, as they celebrated with Marcus over pizza, Lila grinned at her father. See? Told you we're doing fine. Alexander smiled back, his heart lighter than it had been in years. We're not just fine. We're stronger. And for the first time in a long, turbulent journey, he truly believed it. Chapter 9, Redemption. The morning sun spilled through the blinds, casting golden stripes across Alexander McIntyre's kitchen floor. He sipped black coffee, savoring the calm, the quiet that had finally settled over the McIntyre household. After the chaos of betrayal, raids, and federal investigations, the world now seemed normal. Peaceful, even. Lila sat at the table, sketchbook open, doodling carefully rendered battle scenes, her imagination a mix of her father's stories and her own creativity. You've really improved, Alexander commented, peering over her shoulder. Lila grinned, not looking up. I've got a great teacher. He smiled faintly, warmth seeping into his chest. Teaching her, guiding her, being present. This was his redemption in action. But Alexander also knew life couldn't just be safety and routine. The past had left him wary, scarred in ways that even Lila's laughter couldn't fully heal. He hadn't let himself think about dating, companionship, or trust for months. Yet, life has a way of pushing forward whether we're ready or not. It was at a local legal seminar that he met Claire Bennett. She was smart, direct, and unpretentious, a lawyer representing a client in one of Alexander's consulting projects. Their first conversation had been all business, each respecting the other's discipline and clarity. "You're precise," Claire said, scanning his security proposal. "I can tell this isn't your first time thinking through scenarios where people try to kill you." Alexander smirked. "You could say I've had some experience." Claire raised an eyebrow, amused. "You're not exaggerating, are you?" "Not at all," he replied evenly, letting just a hint of humor slip through. From that moment, their paths began crossing more often. Claire was different from anyone Alexander had met, steady, intelligent, and unafraid of his past or the shadows that lingered around him. Conversations over coffee became lunches, then dinner meetings, each laced with sharp wit and mutual curiosity. One evening, after a long day reviewing security blueprints for a government facility, Alexander found himself walking alongside Claire through Pine Ridge's quiet streets. "You never really get used to it," she said softly, glancing at the sunset. "That feeling when people trust you to keep them safe." Alexander nodded, the words resonating. "It's a responsibility I've carried my whole life. Some days, it feels heavier than others." Claire looked at him, sincerity in her eyes. "But you carry it well, and you don't lose yourself in it. That's rare." Her words struck him deeper than he expected. He paused, letting the moment linger. "Thank you, Claire. That means more than you know." And for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to relax, to feel that flicker of connection. Lila was the first to notice the change. One Saturday afternoon, Claire came over to help with a mock interview for Lila's college application. Alexander watched from the kitchen as his daughter and Claire laughed together, a warmth spreading through the house that had been missing for months. Later, Lila sidled up to him. "Dad, she's really cool. I like her." Alexander's chest tightened with a mix of relief and gratitude. "I do too, Lila. And that's what matters. We're both careful, but feels right." Lila grinned. "Finally, you smiling for real. It's nice." Alexander looked at her, a quiet smile tugging at his lips. "It feels nice, kiddo." As weeks turned into months, the bond between Alexander and Claire strengthened. They respected boundaries, supported each other's work, and discovered a shared love for quiet evenings over strategy games, old war documentaries, and long walks through the Rockies. One night, after a particularly grueling consultation project, Claire sat next to Alexander on the porch swing. The air was crisp, scented with pine and distant smoke from wood stoves. "You know," Claire said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, "I think you've been holding on to guilt for too long. You saved your daughter. You did what you had to do. You earned happiness." Alexander's gaze softened, his eyes reflecting the glow of the porch light. "I spent so long surviving. Now I have to learn to live. And sometimes that feels alien." Claire leaned closer. "Then let me show you it's okay to be alive, to smile, to trust again." And for the first time, Alexander didn't resist. He let himself lean in, allowed the smallest hint of warmth in his chest to grow. Meanwhile, the echoes of Kristen's downfall continued to ripple outward. Pine Ridge, once her world, had turned cold. Invitations stopped arriving. Former friends turned their backs. Her attempts to reach Lila were met with silence or polite but firm refusals. Alexander kept the girl shielded, refusing to let her mother's bitterness touch Lila's growth. From what little news filtered through, Kristen's life had become a series of humiliations, failed attempts at work, public gossip, and the constant reminder that she had burned every bridge. One evening, Alexander glanced at a news feed while reviewing a security report. A local blog had run a scathing piece about Kristen McIntyre. From socialite to scandal, how Pine Ridge's most charming mother lost everything. He closed the laptop without comment, taking a deep breath. He felt no glee in her ruin, only relief that the threat to his daughter was gone. That chapter was closed. At home, Alexander and Claire sat in the living room, a quiet domesticity settling over them. Lila was sprawled on the rug, sketching furiously, occasionally showing her latest drawing to both of them. "You've got a real talent," Claire said, picking up a sketch and examining it. "I see the McIntyre spirit here, precision, courage, a little bit of rebellion." Lila beamed. "Thanks. Dad says I get it from him." Alexander ruffled her hair, a soft laugh escaping him. "We both know it's mostly me giving you pointers, kiddo." Claire smiled, watching the father-daughter bond unfold. Alexander caught her gaze and felt a deep, quiet contentment. It was a feeling he hadn't allowed himself in years. Steady, warm, and full of promise. "You know," he said softly, leaning back in his chair, all of it, our lives, the chaos, the rebuilding, it's finally starting to feel like redemption." Claire's hand found his, a simple, grounding touch. "It's yours, Alexander. You earned it. Every bit of it." Lila looked up, a proud grin spreading across her face. "I like seeing you happy, Dad. You deserve it." He smiled fully this time, truly, feeling the weight of past betrayals and chaos lift, replaced with hope, connection, and the quiet thrill of second chances. Outside, in the shadows of Pine Ridge, Kristen's world continued to crumble. Alone, bitter, irrelevant, she was a reminder of the cost of betrayal. But inside the McIntyre home, Alexander had reclaimed his life. Chapter 10, Full Circle. The morning air in Pine Ridge was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and freshly cut grass. Flags fluttered gently over the town square, and a stage had been set up for the ceremony. Residents lined the streets, murmuring in anticipation. Children clutched miniature flags, and elderly veterans adjusted medals pinned to their jackets, reminiscing quietly. Alexander McIntyre stepped onto the stage, his posture impeccable, every movement precise. He wore his dress uniform, not out of vanity, but out of respect for the decades of service it represented. The sun caught the polished bronze and silver stars on his chest, glinting like a quiet promise. Resilience, courage, and honor were not for sale. Beside him, Lila's small hand slid into his. Her eyes shone with pride and excitement. She had grown into a strong, confident young woman, and Alexander knew that the bond they had rebuilt was now unbreakable. Claire Bennett stood on the other side, smiling, her presence calm and reassuring, a partner who respected the weight of his past and embraced the promise of the future. The mayor stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Today, we honor a man whose service to this country and to Pine Ridge exemplifies the very best of our community and our nation. Colonel Alexander McIntyre, your courage, leadership, and unwavering integrity have inspired generations. It is my honor to present you with this Lifetime Achievement Award." The crowd erupted into applause. Alexander's lips pressed into a thin line, his face stoic, though pride swelled quietly beneath. He nodded his thanks, allowing the clapping to wash over him. From the edge of the crowd, a shadow lurked. Kristen McIntyre stood behind the throng, arms folded, mascara streaked, her posture tense. She watched Alexander, Lila, and Claire, a hollow ache twisting inside her. This was the life she had abandoned, the dignity she had forfeited, the family she had betrayed. Every cheer, every smile, every gesture of admiration that Alexander received reminded her of what she had lost and what she could never reclaim. Alexander adjusted the microphone. He cleared his throat, letting his calm, authoritative voice carry. "Thank you," he began. "It is humbling to stand here today, knowing that the sacrifices of many have led to this moment. Service, honor, and loyalty are not just words we wear, they are principles we live by." He glanced at Lila, squeezing her hand lightly, then at Claire, who offered an encouraging nod. "Life," he continued, "will test each of us. Sometimes the battles are external, conflicts, wars, missions. Other times, they are internal, tests of character, of trust, and of resilience. How we respond defines who we are and what we leave behind for those who follow." The crowd was silent now, hanging on each word. Alexander's speech was measured, but each sentence carried weight, subtle but pointed. He did not need to name names. The truth of his life, the betrayal he had endured, and the justice that had followed were all clear in his tone, in his posture, in the quiet confidence that radiated from him. Through trials, through moments of doubt and loss, we must choose to act with integrity, to protect those who cannot protect themselves, to honor those who have trusted us, and to stand firm, even when the world seems to crumble around us. Alexander paused, letting the words sink in. He looked out across the faces before him, veterans, neighbors, friends, and strangers alike. And there, at the very edge, he noticed Kristen's shadowed figure again. Her eyes were wide, her lips parted, as if the realization of her own failures had finally caught up with her. She could see the life she had forsaken, the respect, love, and loyalty she had tried to manipulate or destroy. She saw Alexander, unbroken, unwavering, and stronger than ever. The applause returned, louder now, genuine and heartfelt. Alexander gave a modest nod, allowing the recognition to pass over him without arrogance. Lila leaned close, whispering, "Dad, you're amazing." Alexander smiled softly, ruffling her hair. "So are you, kiddo. You've been my anchor through it all." Claire's hand found his, squeezing it gently. "And now you're allowed to have peace," she said. "You've earned it." He looked at her, a small smile tugging at his lips, a warmth in his chest he hadn't felt in years. "Yes," he murmured. Finally, the ceremony wound down, but Alexander stayed on stage for a few more moments, acknowledging handshakes, nodding at old comrades, offering quiet words of thanks. Every interaction reinforced the life he had reclaimed. His honor intact, his reputation solid, his family safe and thriving. At last, he stepped down from the stage, Lila's hand still in his, Claire at his side. The crowd parted respectfully, giving them space as they walked toward the quiet streets beyond the ceremony. Pine Ridge had seen the story of betrayal, justice, and redemption unfold, and now witnessed the quiet triumph of resilience. Alexander's gaze flicked back one last time toward the crowd's edge. Kristen still lingered, frozen, broken. Her world was smaller now, diminished, her bitterness a shadow she could not escape. Alexander did not speak to her. He did not need to. The life she had destroyed could never touch the one he had rebuilt. Hand in hand with Lila and Claire, Alexander walked down the cobblestone path that led away from the ceremony. The sun warmed his shoulders, the breeze carried the scent of pine, and the distant sounds of Pine Ridge life filled the air, birds chirping, children laughing, dogs barking. For the first time in years, Alexander felt free, not just from betrayal, but from the weight of vengeance, regret, and uncertainty. His decisions had been deliberate, his actions precise, and his principles unwavering. He had lost everything once, but with one call, one calm mind, and a steadfast heart, he had reclaimed his life, and with it his dignity. Lila glanced up at him, a bright grin on her face. "So what's next, Dad?" Alexander chuckled softly. "Next we live. We protect. We grow. We honor what's truly important. And we do it together." Claire squeezed his hand. "And we'll be with you every step of the way." Alexander nodded, eyes forward, every muscle in his body relaxed yet alert. The past, the betrayal, the chaos, all behind him. He had faced it, weathered it, and emerged stronger. The final image was simple but profound. A man who had lost everything, who had faced the ultimate betrayal, had made one decisive call and walked away with dignity, integrity, and the people who mattered most by his side. The McIntyre family, rebuilt and unbroken, moved forward into the sunlit streets of Pine Ridge, leaving the shadow of the past far behind.